And our next speaker is Darren Bond. And Darren is going to talk on volatility, how your cropping decisions can help. Darren is a farm management specialist with Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. Currently a member of the Farm Enterprise Management Team, Darren has shown a passion for everything agriculture for all his life. Born and raised on a grain and cattle farm in Manitoba's Interlake, Darren was previously involved with ag finance and now works with agricultural producers in the industry with all matters farm management. Please welcome Darren.
Thanks, Sharon. There you go. Thank you, sir. So I get a laugh every time I come here. It takes me about an hour to walk 100 feet within the building here because you're always bumping into people you haven't seen in a while, chatting with them, catching up with them. And they've asked me, so I see you're talking here today. What are you talking about? Are you going to tell us what crops to grow to make money? And I say, yep, that's exactly what the government does. Tell you what crops to grow, how to make your money. You know what? I'm an advisor, so I like to joke because I just tell you about your problems. I don't tell you how to fix them, but we are going to have a few hints and some solutions here about what some challenges that we have and how to mitigate some of those challenges. But just to say that, you know, looking around the facility here and seeing all the people, seeing some of the equipment here and some of the services, it's just great time to be involved in agriculture and the positivity and the progressiveness of it. It's great to see. But we do have some challenges and we do have some headaches that we have to deal with. When I was thinking about the volatility that we've sure had a lot of it in the past little while. And it's not the lows that we're talking about. We also have some highs in there too, some good stuff. But, you know, whether it be markets, politics, the weather, you know, the weather is, whether it's climate change or bad weather or whatever, I don't want to get into that discussion, but I think we all can agree is that the weather challenges on the farm has certainly made some difficult times and some difficult decision making and how much crop we had to get off, how much we had to get off in the snow and the mud and over the ice. I think that we have to take that step back, and this is a great time of year to take that step back to make some decisions and have some thought. So when we talk about decision making on the farm, I think it's important that we take that step back, take our emotions out of it as best we can. And it's tough. I'm from a farm too. We always talk that, you know what, farming's a lifestyle, and you know what, I believe it is. But in order to maintain that lifestyle, we also have to treat it as a business. We also have to make sure that we have profit in that business. And we have to make sure that when we're making decisions, we're using numbers and facts rather than guesswork and hunches and assumptions. And it's not to say that our gut doesn't treat us well with intuition, not to say that at all, but it's important to back that up. But in that process, we may also find that we discover some uncomfortable truths with what we've seen and what we determine and some of the numbers that get revealed on our farm. I always say that we have to make sure that we don't get stuck in our decision-making process. We don't get that decision paralysis, because once that happens, it gets to be very hard to get anywhere on the farm and to have progression. And lastly, we have to know what makes us successful on the farm. The Farm Management Canada come up with 7 points, 7 strategies that lead to success on the farm, and I think this is very important. Number 1 is lifelong learning. Every one of you here today is doing that. That's great to see. Attending these events, increasing your knowledge, reading, it's all great. That's the number 1 strategy. Making business decisions with accurate financial data. Number 2, we're going to talk a little bit about cost of production today. That's important. What we do with those numbers is important. Seeking the help of business advisors, accountants, lawyers, transition experts, market experts, whatever the case may be. It's important to seek them out, listen to them. You make your own decisions on your farm, but making those decisions from an informed perspective is very important. Having a written plan, following it, always reviewing it, make sure it doesn't get stagnated. Knowing your cost of production, that's something that within our department we're always coming out with new guides and documents for for the major crops and livestock classes in the province. So it's important to do that. Assess that risk. We're going to talk about risk today. Know what it is, know how much it is, how it can affect you, and then come up with a plan on how to manage that. And using budgeting for financial planning, monitor it, know some positions of where you are now, where you'd like to be, some what ifs, that's important too. So let's just take a step back here. Where is Canada in the big world of crop production here? So if we just take wheat production, for example, that red circle, that's Canada. You can see that we're kind of the middle of the road when it comes to yields. We're not the highest yielding per acre or per hectare in this example in the world. We're not the lowest. We're somewhere in the middle. And I think it's important to realize that where we stand. If we look at costs of production, again, that big oval in the middle, what we find is we're a little bit higher than average on costs of production. We're not the highest, but we're a little bit higher. So I think it's important to remember that when we start talking about those decisions that we make, and just realizing that if we're going to be the lowest cost producer, we might be that in Canada, but we're not that on the world stage. So just some food for thought and some backdrop for this conversation. This slide here is our incomes. As we can see, our gross incomes are going up. That bottom line, the purple line, the flat line is our net income. It's been, as you can see, very flat over the years. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. How do we increase our revenues? We have far more acres, grow more crop. We expand on a per unit basis like that. So I think that's important to keep in mind where our margins have been historically. Again, our cost of production manual here is what our numbers are based on today. You can find it online. Just Google Manitoba Agriculture costs of production. You'll find it. My colleagues are in the crowd, Sharon Arder and Roy Arnott. I work with them in producing this document, so a big shout out to them and the hard work they do. And if we look back at 2019, what are the crops that we grow? Well, the big three, hard red spring wheat, canola, and soybeans, represent nearly 80% of the crops we grow in Manitoba. This is MASC seeded acreage data. We can see that oats and corn are the next largest crops that we grow in Manitoba here. Looking at average yields, and much like what Neil said earlier, what happened yesterday doesn't predict what's going to happen tomorrow, but I think what's important to see with this is what has been happening in the last few years. What we've seen in 2012 to about 2017 was, for the most part, yields increasing, but 2017, 2018, and the 2019 data in here is from Stats Canada, what we've seen is these yields starting to slide off a little bit here. It's not to say that that's what's going to happen next year, but what this does show us is it shows us where our financial position is. At the end of the day, those who grow the most grain are the most profitable. I know that's the most basic, common sense statement that you're probably bound to hear today, but it is totally true. Grow the grain, make the cash. Looking at our crop prices, this is over, again, last 7-8 years since 2011. Our main crops here of wheat, canola, soybeans, and we've thrown oats. Oats is at the bottom there. What we've seen over the last little bit is, for the most part, flat pricing. Prices have slipped off. Prices come back. All it takes is a drone strike to change our prices. All it takes is a tweet to change our prices, it seems. I always joke that 10, 15 years ago, 5 cents a bushel swing was a cause for rioting at the coffee shop. Now we just shrug that off and say that's nothing. Prices can jump. I've seen prices jump 40 cents just because, boat needed to be loaded and the base is sweetened up, and all of a sudden, and now we're in the money when it comes down to selling our crop. We'll talk a little bit about that and how important it is to understand that. Look at our operating costs of production. We see there in 2013-14 a little bit higher. Mainly that was due to the fertilizer prices at the time. But for the most part, they are slowly and gradually trending upwards. We often see 2-3% per year on our seed and chem and fuel prices. Again, fertilizer is its own little market, but we see, again, just those prices, those costs are just slowly creeping up on us.
Fair enough.
These are our crop costs of production within our document that we have. And you can pick those documents up at the curling rink. That's where our booth is, or again online. And what we can see here, that it's just not getting any cheaper to grow these crops. And we can see that our most expensive crop, corn, is just over $500 an acre all in to grow. But we're a little bit north of $200 an acre on operating costs for most of the big three crops. So again, these prices, these costs are still continually going up on us. But the more important picture is where does that leave our profitability here? And in this example, for the crops that we have growing in on our farm, and to give you an example, for our big three crops, our canola and soybean pricing is about $10.50 a bushel. So depending on the date on the calendar, sometimes I'm in the money, sometimes I'm out of the money. It all depends. Prices go up, prices go down, but that's the prices that we have in our document. I think our wheat price is just under $7, and the yields that we're using are the 5-year MASC average yield, so about 42 bushels an acre for canola, 59 for hard red spring wheat, I believe, and around 37-ish, 38 for soybeans. And what we can see here is, using these numbers here, around $20 an acre profit, which is, pretty slim profit considering if we're putting in $300, $400, $500 an acre into the crop. We can see how much risk there is out there. So whenever we talk about profitability, it's easy. I think it's too simplistic to talk about profitability, and this is when I like to bring in the risk portion of this. And I'd encourage every farm to start thinking about it in this sense and using your own numbers. I think it could be very fun, and my definition of fun might be different than yours. I know I might not sound like a great fun person to have a beer with here, but honestly, this is the benefit of doing these costs of productions and figuring out some of these things. And what we can see here, for example, is the blue line being the reward, so the bar, so say in canola 5.4%, that's essentially our return on investment for the crop that we're growing. The dotted line at the top is how much coverage of total costs we have at 80% agri insurance levels. So essentially what we want to see is we want to see that top line to be a bit higher, and we want to obviously see that blue bar to be as high as we can too. So it starts to reveal some things about our crop choices that we grow in the farm. So if we take, for example, we'll compare and contrast oats and corn in this example. We can see that they both have very similar returns, but corn is a lot more risky to grow. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, right? It costs more money to grow. There's a greater probability of loss. That's why the insurance premiums are a little bit higher. There's more variability from that perspective. So it's important to understand that. So if we start to look at some of the other crops, let's just take canola and soybeans, for example. We can see in terms of returns, they have a very similar return, very similar profit levels to us. But as we can see, canola actually has a little bit better coverage. So there's less at risk with canola using these numbers. And I think it's important for us to figure that out on our farm, to not only know where our profit is, but to see where our risk is. Another way to look at it, I like looking at things on a cost per bushel sold. And this actually makes it very easy when you're doing your marketing plan. You can start to see how much does it cost me on a cost per bushel. So if we start thinking about risk in a cost per bushel, we can see that our insurance coverage here at just over $356 an acre divided by our yield at 42 in this case comes up with $8.48 of covered risk. So that means that I've bought crop insurance and the first $8.48 I'm covered off on. Using again our numbers, we're just below $10 a bushel break-even cost, the $9.96. So if we take away that $8.48 of costs covered by insurance, we find that we have $1.48 And because I'm government, I got to say it, assets flapping in the wind. That's the exposed risk. That's what is out there that we don't have coverage for. And if we take our market price at $10.50, we can see we have 54 cents a bushel that goes into our pocket. So we're looking at that bushel of canola. 54 cents is going into my pocket. I got $8.48 covered by crop insurance. I paid someone else to take that risk. So essentially, I got $1.48 of risk flapping there that's going to be entirely on my shoulders. So we look at that at the farm, and we look at this for the 6 main crops that we grow here, and we can see a few things. And I'm going to compare and contrast canola and soybeans, for example. We can see that we have a little bit less coverage on our soybeans on this sample farm, and we have more exposed risk on soybeans, yet we have still the same profit. So what does that tell me in decision making on my farm? If I got swing acres and I could put in canola or soybeans, I obviously have to understand what my land's capable of, what my time's capable of, and my management capacity, all those things. But I'd be leaning a little bit towards canola in this example than soybeans, just because even though profit's the same, a little bit more risk on the beans. So I challenge people to start thinking of it this way, because we start thinking and seeing where the risk is within our farm. Our seeding date example that we've used, so MASC has a seeding date. They have a % of probable yield. I don't like that. I like profit. I like to think of things in profit. So what we can see here, if we turn it into a profit perspective, that red and black line represents wheat. We can see that if we get it in early, we make more money, but the profitability of it slips very quickly as the calendar moves along during seeding. I, again, don't think that's a surprise to anyone, but something that's a little bit interesting, if we look at canola, which is the black line with the bluish-purple diamonds, compared to soybeans, which is the green line, what we can see is that canola holds on to its profitability as we move throughout the seeding season a little bit better than soybeans. I've actually started to see this in my area. We've started to see, it used to be seed the wheat, seed the canola, seed the beans, But now what we're seeing, especially if we start to get some time pressures within seeding, it's seed the wheat, maybe start on the canola, but if the seeding deadline's coming up or weather's coming up, flip into beans and then back into canola, because again, canola just seems to be a little bit more resilient according to the cold, hard numbers of crop insurance. A lot of numbers on this slide. I'm going to boil it right down to the basics. The more diverse your crop rotation is, the more yield you can get. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. If we look at the canola wheat one at the top, canola wheat, canola wheat, canola wheat, we can see that over the span, we got about $150, just over $150 of profit. If we look at one of the more diverse ones, just below that, of corn, canola, wheat, beans, not that everyone can grow corn, but we can start to see that we can pump up how much we make, because a more diverse rotation is going to give you a little bit better crop yield. And you know what? 12%, 1%, 3% increase over the previous, over the other crop with a diverse rotation, that starts to add up year over year over year. That starts to add up over a decade. That starts to add up after your lifetime of farming. And that often could be the difference between you being competitive and getting land versus the neighbor getting it. Speaking of land, here's 2012 to 18 land appreciation rates. And we can see some big numbers there, over 25% per year in 2012 and 13. This is from FCC, the Farmland Value Report. We can see that starting to mute, I think in Manitoba, I think it was 3.7% for all of Manitoba in 2018. And when we think back to those crop yields, how we've seen over the last 3 years they've slipped down, I don't think that's a surprise, to see that. Whenever we talk about land, I always like to talk a little bit about interest rates. Just as a side note, when those land appreciation values were high, we were at 1% to 0.5% of Bank of Canada, and now it's 1.75%. So another factor in muting some of those values. And for farmland values, and I actually wouldn't even worry about what the dollar per acre says on the right-hand side of the slide. I would just look at that curve. And what shows that curve, that land has jumped in the last handful of years, in the last decade here. And again, that's not a surprise to anyone. But that definitely is a game changer in how we manage on our farm. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And whether it's land, purchase, or rent, we're going to talk about that. So I find that with our cost of production info in the past, we've talked a lot about operating costs. I find it's hard to drive down those operating costs, assuming that we're operating with knowledge, we're pre-buying, participating in programs, volume discounts. I find that it gets to be hard to push down those operating costs past a certain point. So the fixed costs, I think, is the place that to spend a bit of time discussing. Fixed costs are so widely variable across farms, hugely variable. And whether it's land purchase or rent, equipment purchases, they're so crucial to get them right in today's world. We got a great document called Rent Plan. We're going to have just a brief discussion on land rents. And what I like to challenge the producers I deal with is when you're talking about land rent, markets rule the day. But what do we see in the land rent markets? It's not like land purchases. We can't go and search up what land rents have gone for. It's a dark market. So we have to understand what we're able to pay for. So this is a great little tool. It takes your rotation, does a weight averaging, and comes up with what you can afford to pay on your farm for rent. And in this example, it comes up with about $75 per acre. Now, $75 per acre may buy or may rent you some land, and it may not, but at least you know what you can pay on your farm. So the thing, though, with that is that it's very sensitive. If we take a 50 cent a bushel hit on beans and canola and a 25 cent a bushel hit on our hard red spring wheat, we drop that by nearly $20 an acre. Well, again, that's just a tweet. That's just a press conference away from that happening. And that's the sensitivity to what we can pay for rent on our farm. And we have to make sure that we're aware of that. Talk a little bit about land values. If we're talking about land values from a margin basis, if we take some profit out of it, on our farm that we do up with this document, we find that the most we can justify is about a $3,000 an acre or $3,000 per acre payment, or $3,000 per acre value on a farm with about 75% equity. So 3/4 owned, 1/4 financed. But again, we lose some pricing here, 25 cents a bushel, and we're down $500 an acre, what we can afford. We jump down 25 cents a bushel and a 5% yield loss, and we're halving how much we can afford on that land. That's how sensitive things are. So when yields were always trending up and we had good prices, it's easy to make those decisions. But when the yields come a little bit back down to earth, it can be a lot more critical to get that information right. And we can see here that how healthy the farm is financially, it determines how much we can pay. So the difference, 10% equity difference, is over $2,000 an acre of value. So it's huge. If you're more financially secure, you can afford more. Again, common sense statement of the day, but it is that much more impactful today than what it has ever been, especially with these land values. If we're going to buy that $3,000 an acre ground, for financing it, it's $250 an acre. So how many acres is it going to take? 3-4 owned acres and the profit from those acres to pay for that purchased acre? Something to consider. And if we have 2,500 owned acres on a farm, we're going to go buy that half section. If we start off at 85% equity, we're going to finance it. We've just chopped off 10% equity on our farm. Now we're at 75% equity. So what that means is now you've made your play for the purchase of that land. Not to say that 75% equity is not a good spot to be in, but now you have a spot where you're a little less competitive if you have several bad years in a row. Or if another chunk of land comes up, now you really got to think about it because you can't use your financial might to get that land. Closing thoughts on land. You know what? If you can cash flow it, debt service it, I don't think I'd be one to talk you out of it. But you have to be aware of that productive capacity and go into it with eyes wide open because it's not as clear cut as what it once was. You've got to understand where it leaves you. So I like this saying, don't confuse being bulletproof with not yet being shot. I think it's important to have that humility and know where we are. A few things on equipment. Here, news headline, equipment prices are going up. That's a shocker, I know, but they've gone up and they've gone up in a big way. Start talking about a new combine and header, $720,000 cost. We're talking almost $200 an hour just in depreciation and ownership costs. That's huge. There's only so much cash flow on the farm that we can be able to pay for these things. And one of the things that kind of bothers me is when I hear people say, well, you don't want to get behind on equipment on your farm. Why? No, I don't want to get behind the payments on my farm. But making these equipment decisions are harder than ever with these prices. I always take that step back. What gain are you going to get? So we know what the costs are. That's easy. But how much gain? What are you getting out of this? So are you making any extra income? I've got to have an example here. Independent openers. You're going to get 5% more yield. Are you gaining any efficiencies? So using a grain cart, it's going to keep that combine in the crop rather than idling on the headlands and costing you money. How much costs are you saving? One pass, saving in tillage. And we can extend that to anywhere where it comes for new technologies, variable rates, everything. Sit down and figure out, what does this mean to me? How much money am I going to make? Where does this leave me? Be honest with that. Understand where it is. I think that rather than talking about not getting behind on equipment on the farm, I'd change it to, you don't want to get behind on technology on the farm. Because we could see the farms that could implement good technology are the ones that are more resilient. Break it down on a cost per acre basis, and you got to get your use out of things. Closing up here, it's hard to drive down those input costs. You know, small changes in yield and price can have large impacts on the farm now. Financially healthier farms are more resilient to downturn, more competitive when it comes down to land purchase and rents. Again, that's not a surprise, but what I'm telling you is that it's much more impactful than what you think. Land purchase now requires some thought, figuring out where it's going to leave you. And now more than ever, equipment purchases you need to get them right. They need to turn a positive return to the farm. Otherwise, what purpose does it serve? So with that, I wanted to say thank you. We will be posting this on the website shortly. But if there's any questions, I will be up in the concourse afterwards. Feel free to pull me aside, challenge me on any of my numbers, have a chat with me. I love talking about this stuff. I just wanted to say thank you for everybody coming out and listening to me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show today. Thank you.